Welcome to the SRS Podcast. I'm your host, Aaron J. Babiar, and I'm the Training Director of Support Raising Solutions. Whether you're a new ministry worker or a veteran looking to increase your competence and confidence, Support Raising Solutions seeks to bless you in your quest to be a spiritually healthy, vision-driven, fully funded Great Commission worker. Once again, I am joined today by my friend and co-partner in the gospel, Mark Wilson. Mark, you are the Managing Director of Support Raising Solutions, so you and I get to interact quite a bit and really have enjoyed having you join our team. Before we jump into our topic today, remind some of our listeners who you are. I know that we had you on an earlier podcast, but we have a lot of different guests. So reintroduce yourself to everybody, if you would.
Sure. So I'm Mark, which you already know that, but I worked in a ministry called Cadence International for 23 years. So my wife and I were in Germany for 15 of those doing youth ministry with military dependents. And so that's a very niche group of people that's focused. So we did that and loved it. I spent 7 years at the headquarters in Colorado working there. And then in the last year, we've transitioned to Support Raising Solutions. And so we have been on support for all 23 of those years.
Right. And within that, at one point, you happened to go to a boot camp. What year was that? You went through a SRS boot camp?
So December 2015, we were in Chicago at a seminary, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, Northern Seminary. Yep. I used to live not too far from there. And we definitely did a boot camp there. I'm assuming it was myself with Micah May that led that particular boot camp?
Yes, that's exactly right.
Okay,
Yep.
Great. So you had already been on support for years at that point. Why did you go to a boot camp?
Yeah, so my role had changed. I was the division director for student ministries, and so I had 20 to 30 youth workers who worked for me, and I changed to an HR role where I was the director of mobilization. So recruiting, selecting, training, and sending missionaries. Well, our biggest issue was that we have trouble recruiting people because we were support-based ministry. So 20 people would apply. As soon as support came up, 17 would withdraw. And then out of the 3 that were left, we would hire maybe 2. And in the support raising process, we were losing 50% of people because they would just get so frustrated. So I was like, man, there's got to be a better solution. So I started looking, and I found Support Raising Solutions and through the God Ask and went to it because I thought we've got to get better at helping people raise support because it's the funnel that's unnecessarily filtering people out.
Wow. Awesome. And obviously God used that and relationships were built and one thing led to another. And then within the last year, we definitely invited you in to come in and be our managing director. And we're thrilled to have you on board. And by the way, my for those that wonder, I happily transitioned my role into being the training director, not the managing director. There are certain things that I can do, but I'm not as great at that Mark is gifted at. And so it's just it's an awesome thing to have him on the team and helping us as we continue to build this ministry for God's glory. And by the way, just a reminder for everybody listening, in case somebody wondered, I raise and live completely off my own support, as does Mark. Neither one of us get a bonus because you listen to this podcast, or we don't get like extra funds, based upon the attendance at boot camps or anything like that. We both only raise and live off of partners in ministry, people that pray for us, that financially support us, mostly on a monthly basis. And so we do try and walk the walk, talk the talk, and model the very thing that we're encouraging other Great Commission-focused leaders to do. So I think that's about enough of an intro, brother, but let's go ahead and segue and talk about our topic today, which is seasons of support. Now, there are different seasons in support raising. A lot of times people misidentify the support raising process as, I just got to find enough people to give me money so I never have to think about money again. And you and I both know that that's pretty misguided and not even accurate from a number of different ways. But let's dig into, I can think of at least 3. Maybe we'll think of a 4th one while we're talking. But yeah, let's dig into some of those seasons of support. And let's start with the most basic is getting started. Let's talk about that season. What does that look like? But also, what should it look like? Because we have the cultural norm, and then we have what's healthy, and they're not necessarily the same thing. So unpack that for us, if you would, Mark.
Yeah, and I have my experience, and then I've watched others, and I know that my experience was really different than some other people's. And so I don't know what was healthy, but I know that my wife and I were so unbelievably excited to go to the mission field. And so in about 6 months, we raised our funds. Like we quit our jobs. We went at it full time. Remember, this is 1995.
Okay.
So there was no support raising solutions, at least in my knowledge at that point. Maybe Steve was teaching stuff. We just didn't know about it. But we raised our support so quickly, our passports weren't ready.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so we actually had to wait another 8 weeks for our passports to get done to go to the field. But
wow.
Anyway.
Well, let me interrupt you right there, though, because that's fantastic. We see that as a result of support raising solutions. It's not uncommon for people to raise their full support in 100 days. In fact, we see it's actually fairly common for people to raise their full support in 3 to 6 months. I wouldn't say it's normal. I'd say it's common. What's normal is people don't get much training. If they read a book, it might not be the right book, and don't get me started on all that. Yeah, right. But what's normal is if people get fully funded, it's within 2 to 3 years. The reality is most people don't, and that's just some observations. There's a lot more data behind all that. We'll leave it right there for now. But we also know that season of getting started, that brings with it a lot of different things. So let's go back to your story and some of your observations.
Yeah, and so I didn't know. Like we literally got the hey, write some newsletters, go raise your support, and I don't know. We figured some things out. So I don't know that we had any great guidance. We got to talk to people. We got to talk to everybody we know, and we got to talk to people that we don't know. And so we had people host parties, and we did it. Like I'm still amazed. We raised it mostly through dinner parties.
Wow.
And we would meet with, and it was really different than,
right.
And I found
and again, this was the early to mid 90s.
It's really, and I'm finding part of what made me think of seasons is how I'm raising support now. What worked back then doesn't work. It just doesn't work. And I don't know how it worked back then, but it did. Like,
right.
But it was great. And what I've seen as a support raising coach is that sometimes people lack enthusiasm, or their fear overrides their enthusiasm. And I've heard people say things like, I don't know what it means or looks like to raise support full time. And so they might make 1 or 2 calls a week, or, and they kind of just where they'll go to a Sunday school class, and but it's very passive versus active. And I think that season for us was very active. And again, we were living in a spare bedroom. We, we were doing a lot of things because we didn't have kids.
Right.
And now I'm raising support. I got a mortgage. I got kids. There's a different. It's a different season for me. But I think my observation is sometimes people get passive versus active in that period, and it causes issues.
Right. And for our listeners, one of the things that we encourage people to do in that basic get started season is, first of all, read a good book. Scott Morton's Funding Your Ministry is great. Obviously, we use Steve Shadrack's The God Ask as part of our primer for our support raising boot camps. There are some good books out there. That's a couple of them for sure that we would recommend. But also, we don't think it's just a head thing. We think that training is key. Of course, we offer the SRS boot camp. There are other good trainings out there, so we don't want to pretend there isn't. We're pretty akin to this one. We think it's the best in the world. Yeah. Part of that's because we've heard people tell us from all over the world this is the best of the world. So hopefully we're not being too full of pride in saying that. And yet the reality is kind of a third thing a lot of people need is they need some coaching. And that's separate from reading a book. That's separate from listening to a podcast or actually getting training, which we recommend. And so that first season, when somebody first gets started, they have never really, really raised support before. That's a little bit different than some of the other seasons. And we'll dig into those first. Yeah. But you already touched on one of the big things right there is we don't see very many people successfully raise support that just kind of nibble around the edges and do it part-time. And we won't unwrap everything within that. But that's one of the reasons training is key is people need to understand what actually it is they're committing to actually pull this off.
Yeah, and expectations are clear. I mean, like, if you don't know what it means to do the job, you're not equipped. Imagine going and they just give you a Starbucks shirt and say, go make coffee. You don't have that. I mean, it's like that, only way worse, because it's so much more significant to be able to communicate what God's asked you to do. Now, you can love people through coffee. There's no doubt, but it's important to be able to be good at your craft. And if you don't have those training or expectations or clear vision for what you're doing, you're going to struggle unless you're one of those very self-made people who can figure it all out on their own.
Well, we hope that people will share this podcast with friends, maybe even this particular episode, but the podcast in general. But I think we've talked enough on various podcasts about that initial season and what's necessary to get going. And in reality, of course, is in the boot camp. We talked for a couple of days about that stuff. But let's go ahead and shift a little bit and let's talk about a different season. And from that standpoint is the season of needing an increase. You and I have both found ourselves in those seasons before.
Yep, sure have.
And that's a little different from our third season. We'll talk about kind of a reboot. That'll be kind of later on. But let's talk about the need for the increase. And I'll just set it up for you this way, Mark. If somebody is ministering full-time for the gospel, things are going really well, God is blessing, that doesn't mean that their budget is ever going to just stay like the static thing. Like it's probably going to change. Why is that?
Well, if God blesses, he increases, right? He increases responsibility. He increases, opportunities, needs increase, and whether they're family or ministry needs. Mm-hmm. And then, as we know, inflation is a very real part of this planet.
Sure.
And so, I just think about my healthcare costs in the last 6 years they're so much more than they were. So just those kinds of things change. Yeah. So you haven't established, and we know in America that the wage has not kept up with costs. And so we're not saying something to people that they don't understand, right? It's a very real deal that things get more expensive.
And I know we have people that listen to this that aren't in the U.S., and I don't know all the percentages, but I know that myself just this year, I don't remember the exact dollar, but I've been going up every year, and I think just this year my monthly premium just to have health care went up somewhere between $150 and $200. And that's one of the smaller increases I've had in the last few years. So paying for health care is really important. And my family is actually crucial because of my wife's health challenges. And so that doesn't mean I'm not being faithful to the ministry. That doesn't mean I'm not doing what God's called me to do. But I'm facing a very real reality just in that little niche when you come to budgeting of, I need a little bit more than what I had just to cover my basics. But then you began touching on some other stuff beyond just, inflation and healthcare. What about ministry? Does ministry always cost the same forever, Mark?
As not as far as I can tell. Things, again, similar features change your ministry landscape, that change your healthcare landscape, that change your salary landscape.
Right.
And it could be that you're needing new equipment. It could mean that you have grown so much your building needs to be expanded. It could mean that you need a new technology to help translate the word of God into a new language. Yeah. So again, these are things that are real, and the Lord of provision has those things. You got to go find him. But so he's expanding your influence, which also needs to expand your provision.
All right, so let's dig in on that real quick. Let's do a couple real life examples. I know I have one recently, but let's start with you. Now, you're in that third season right now, so we'll get to that in a second. Let's go back to the second season. Describe a time, if you would, and I'll do the same, when you and Kathy being fully funded and God is blessing, the ministry is going well, and yet, you're realizing the math isn't adding up like it used to anymore. I need to raise some more support. Give us an example from your life, if you would.
Yeah, a couple of things. We were running youth ministry and was going really well. Like the ministry had doubled in size in a couple of years. And the ministry had gotten so big, we were worried about losing personal touch with students. And so Kathy and I wanted to make sure that we still were having that intimate connection with students. And so what we were trying to figure out was, one, we needed a way to transport them places so that we can have a closer connection. And then we needed a bigger apartment to have them over to our house. And so we were living in a 2-bedroom apartment at this time in Germany. So we said, look, we want to do these two things. We went to our donors and said, look, we would love a van and we'd love to move to this bigger place, which means we'll need to raise this much. And people were ecstatic about joining that opportunity to continue to make the ministry expand, but also very personal to people on a very private and intimate level.
And so, give us some numbers.
Oh, that we're talking 20 years ago. Let's see if I still got numbers.
Right.
I mean, I think the van was $21,000, and I think we needed probably another $600 or $700 a month to get to the apartment that we wanted to rent. So that means, again,
so you had kind of a special gift need of about $21,000, but you had a practical need of at least $700 more a month, give or take.
Okay. Yep, give or take.
Okay, all right. And so here you were fully funded, but you needed to take a time to go, you know what? We were fully funded. Technically, we're not right now. Things aren't drastic yet, but we're going to have a problem if we don't start leaning into this vision. And so what did you do to raise that support?
Well, so we happened to be coming home from Germany.
Okay.
And so we went to all of the churches and people and places that we supported. We shared the vision. We cast it and said, hey, look, we need you to give to this. And people gave. And I mean, it was, we did, what we've been trained to do, which was go talk to people and invite them to join the vision.
Right.
And we also went to people. It was the first time we ever went to people in the military community that we were serving.
Okay.
That was a new concept because we'd always had people from the state supporting us for the ministry.
Right.
And we actually went to parents and said, we want what your students have had to go on to other students. And so that was a new thing for us there in that particular one.
Very cool. Very cool. Let's take a few seconds to mention an important resource that can be helpful for support raisers. CMM Press has published another great book that is not only for those who raise their personal support, but also they oversee teams or even an organization whose staff teams raises their own personal support. Scott Morton is a champion for biblically based ministry partnership development, so I highly recommend that you pick up a copy of his book called Blind Spots. It's available at cmmpress.org, where you can receive a 10% discount if you use the code SRS Podcast.
Tell me, Aaron, about a time that you had where you had a need and you were fully funded already.
Yeah, so this is very recent, very fresh for me. In fact, I'm still in it. I'm right at the very end. In the last couple of months, I had just some changes, both organizationally, of where I needed to raise a little more support, just for the cost of doing ministry, really. Not me getting a big raise or anything like that, just cost of doing ministry. And then to throw a little extra on it, so that was about $600 that I was realizing I needed to raise. I had a separately $600 a month of a monthly supporter drop off. They're actually still on my support team. They're wonderful people. They came to me with tears in their eyes to say, we need to give $600 less per month. We're so sorry, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, first of all, I have to be honest. This is like my biggest monthly supporter.
Yeah, that's painful.
Yeah. But I was able to gracefully say, it's okay. God's got this. And I've just learned over time to go, you know what? It's that, and not to be like trite about it, but when God closes the window, he opens a door, or whatever you want to say. But I really, like in that meeting, I kind of felt like, you know what? God's just going to be bringing some other people to my team. It really is okay. And I was able to thank them and be gracious. And by the way, they're still on my team. That tells you that they were given a lot, the fact that they backed off $600. But I was able to, by God's grace, just be very okay with that and be like, it's all right. I was already needing to raise another $600 anyway. I guess it's just going to be $1,200. And so I entered into a season recently where I was like, I don't feel like I need to completely stop all of my normal full-time duties. I do need to not take on some fresh projects, but I need to, raise some support as I'm going. I happen to live in a community in the U.S. I'm living in the Bentonville area of Arkansas, where even though I do tend to get on an airplane every few weeks, I'm here enough. My family's here. We've lived here for years, that there are quote unquote fresh prospects, people I've never talked to before. And so I've stepped into that season. And after it took about a month, which is probably faster than I've ever raised support at any time in my life. Nice. About a month in, I was only $37 a month short of my goal. To which I go, man, that is just God and his glory. And I'm so thankful. That's not just because I've developed a skill set. That's really more than anything else. That's just God having brought some very responsive, I really felt, Mark, like God has allowed me to do some of that quicker than what would even be normal for me, partly because of some next season of life things I have coming anyway in my really near future. And so, but I do, by the way, for the listener, I'm cognizant of the fact of, here's a guy that God has chosen to use to have some voice on this topic on a global scale. And I'm not any different than anybody listening to this. That
No doubt.
Sometimes needs just come up, and I need to walk the walk, talk the talk, practice what I preach. And I'm not getting a huge, big raise. And Mark sees my 12-year-old truck in my driveway. I'm not living lavishly or trying to be extravagant or anything like that. I want enough for my family and ministry to thrive. And that's what I need. And so, Mark, you and I have both been in that season of needing an increase for good purposes.
Yep.
And how often would you say that's normal? Or maybe I should rephrase that question. How normal is that for people that have been on support longer than just a minute or two?
I think it's absolutely normal. I feel like sometimes people can get beat down by it because they're like, oh, we got to go raise more money, like that's,
right.
But again, we got to reframe it. We get to invite more people. We get more opportunity for people to give, to contribute to the kingdom. Mm-hmm. But it is normal. And I think in this particular season, what about, for you, what are some things you see there, and just as far as the normalcy and regularity of this?
I think anybody that's been on support for a long time, if they haven't had to ask for an increase, and forgive me if this doesn't sound very gracious, it's because they're not being honest with themselves about their budget. Sure. And I could be wrong. there can be unique situations, but generally speaking, the cost of living goes up. The cost of printing goes up. The cost of, your computer break. I had a computer stolen, a couple of years ago. And when I went to replace it with basically the same thing, it was several $100s more than the one that had been stolen. I even had insurance, but even then it was like, well, yeah, but got to throw in several $100s to make up for the. So I just think it's completely normal, and it shouldn't be something we run from. Instead, my opinion is take a perspective of, who else does God have that gets to be a part of this mission, part of this vision? There's a perspective that I think you can have with that can be really healthy, or it can be really destructive. Oh, this is an interruption for my ministry, and it's not. It's a part of your ministry.
Yeah, and that mindset makes all the difference. And there's a couple of factors I think about this interim need, like I need to raise more, that actually make it a really fun season. Mm-hmm. One, you are established in ministry already, and just by that very fact, you are touching people's lives. They have seen the impact you have. They believe in what you do. So you are generating contacts and people who are potential partners by the very fact that you are doing your vision. And so I think this season, often I've seen people raise money very quickly in this season because they're in that super sweet spot. They have mostly of what they needed. They're inviting people to join, and they've got these invested people who go, I love what you do, and I'm just waiting for you to ask me to join it.
Yep. Or in some cases, an increase.
An increase.
I literally had a guy, and I don't need to get any details on this beyond what I'm about to say, because this is going to be a little personal, but I had a supporter who's on my team for $100 a month already, and I mentioned to him, I was like, hey, I've stepped into a new season here, and I'm actually needing to do some increases, and I'd like to talk with you about that possibility at some point. That is all I said, because at the time, it was within a group of other people that were talking ministry. It was appropriate at that time to say that to him. Mark, I didn't say any more than that. This is where I say this is more God's grace than anything else, because it's not like we did a presentation and I shared a brand new story or anything like that. Literally, the guy called me a couple hours later and said, hey, dude, I have been rethinking my finances anyway, and my wife and I have recently decided we just need to not have alcohol in our house anymore. And I looked at my budget, and we'd been spending $150 a month on alcohol, and we're just not going to do that anymore. And so I've been giving you $100 a month. I'm going to take that $150 back from the devil, and I'm going to give it to you. So bump me up to $250 a month.
Wow, that's a great use of his $150 a month, right?
Holy cow. And it floored me.
Yeah.
Because I was like, this is one of those things where, and I didn't even get to the point where I did like an ask, right? I just said, hey, here's a need. I'd like to speak with you a little bit more about that down the road. And there are times where, I really don't like the saying, just let go and let God. Like, I feel like that can be really like over Sunday school,
sure,
Jesus-y. But that was a situation where that is completely what happened. And I would, like, my intent was to call him up and set up a meeting and talk about that stuff. But in reality, God had much better plans than I did. And it happened a lot quicker than I had even anticipated, at least in that guy. And that guy is a part of the not quite $1,200 I've raised, right? Like I said, I'm $37 off. So I'm working on it.
And I think you bring up a point that is a good instance where God provides something very unique and special, but it is not a practice that you rely on in raising support. You know, for somebody to come out, he does give us those wonderful blessings where somebody's like, I have never met you and I want to give to your team, or, you know, I want to take my, like it happens.
Those
and we're
happen.
Thankful for it, but it is not where you invest most of your time. And I think that's what Aaron's trying to say there. I think I'm not putting words in his mouth, but
please clarify.
But yeah,
that.
that's a really important thing. I think you guys hear. It does happen. And I had somebody, I was on the phone talking to him just to check and see how he was doing. He's like, hey, what about another $25 a month? I'm like, sure, great.
Wow.
You know, and again, I didn't ask, but it isn't how most of the support I'm raising has been raised.
Right. It's enough so that we would say it's not abnormal, but we wouldn't call it normal either. You should have a better strategy than,
that's right.
I'm just waiting for people to call me and give me more money. That's probably not that great of a strategy.
That's what you've heard. Hope is not a strategy. You've heard that. I'm sure all of us have heard that.
Good. Well, let's segue into the other season of support that you and I wanted to talk about. And this is really where you have found yourself over the past 6 months or so. And it really has to do with, we could call it a reboot, if you will, where someone who's been on support for years, that they've raised and lived off full support, and their passion for God hasn't changed a little bit, but their focus has changed in their ministry, meaning they've moved countries, or they've moved cities, maybe they've moved organizations, and that can be a multi-tiered thing, because that's not just a situation where you have to let all your supporters know what's going on, but sometimes you actually have to get them to stop giving through one portal and start giving through a different portal. And I'm gonna hush up a little bit. Tell us a little bit more about that situation that you've found yourself in recently.
Yeah, it has forced me to re-engage with all of the skill sets that SRS teaches, from calling, contacts, follow up, just engaging and referrals. But I think what it's done is it's made me rethink what my expectations were and the amount of work and effort had to go in. And because I had a season like Aaron just talked about 2 years ago or 3 years ago where I raised $1,500 in a month, I thought raising this support for our new job would be, I'd have it done in 90 days.
Right.
And no, it does happen. There are people that do it. But I think because of several things that were involved, we also were moving kids, moving schools, moving states, moving organizations.
Houses.
Houses.
You had a lot of change rather quickly.
There was a lot going on. And then we were leaving a ministry of 23 years, and our supporters weren't all in one location. So my expectations did not meet my transition's reality.
Okay.
And so that's where, we were working like crazy. And the other thing, remember, we've had donors for 23 years. So if they were 45 when we started, they're now 68.
Yeah.
And so they were saying, hey, we're going to retirement, different income level, can't give anymore.
Right.
And we had people who said, hey, we really love military ministry. We want to keep giving there. And so
nothing against you, but we're going to keep our money where it's going.
That's right.
Which is fine.
We firmly believe in SRS. People should give where they're passionate.
Yeah.
And if they're not passionate about what you're doing, you don't talk them into it. That's not what we do.
No.
And so all that for us is the season, I was realizing, was different than raising an addendum to what we needed. It was revisioning the entire thing. And so I actually had to go to every single donor and start over again and say, here's our new ministry.
Yeah.
Here's why I think you should give.
Yeah.
Will you give? Will you consider giving more?
Right.
And
here's what you're investing in. Here's a story of a changed life. Would you do this? In a lot of ways, you had people that had already been on your team for 20 plus years that you had a brand new support raising presentation with.
That's exactly what we had to do. And so it's been far more challenging than I anticipated it to be. And again, I get very idealistic and I need reality to help temper that. But in reality tempered a whole lot here. And so we're working hard. We're about between 82 and 85%. And it's been good, but I think we're older now. We have kids. We've got a mortgage. And so the pressure was on. Remember, I said earlier in the podcast, we were staying in our parents' spare bedroom when we were raising support before. We didn't have any kids. We were just
It'd be
on
a little
it.
hard with 3 kids right now.
Yeah. And we got one in college. And so I think there's just more competing for my time.
Yeah.
And I'm not as young as I was. Like I got to have breaks now. And so it's a different season.
Yeah.
But the skill sets, again, the same skill sets you need in that beginning, you need them now too.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's any thoughts, Aaron? Have you transitioned, you're doing a few different things. Any thoughts from your end on this part of things?
Well, I want to affirm a couple of things because that you might have raised some very fair questions in sharing what you just shared. So Mark actually, and I completely affirm you doing this, but Mark, when you picked up and moved to Arkansas, God really led you and Kathy in doing that, even though you still realized you had to raise some more support. And so what that means is Mark actually did a favor to come and do the podcast with me today. It's good to spend time together, but the reality is, Mark, you're not in the office very much right now, are you?
Nope, just to pick up my mail. That's about it.
Yep. And so we are surrounding and encouraging Mark and saying, hey, this is your first duty. Like, we want you in the office. There are things I'm even dreaming about, like from international context. I've dreamed to Mark probably more than I should have already because he's not quote unquote in the office yet. But there's things that we want from him. There's things that we desire for him to do in his new role. And yet the reality is he shouldn't report to the office. He shouldn't report to doing all the things that not only do we want him to do, he wants to do, right?
Yep, absolutely. It's a gift to have this clear boundary.
You're chomping at the bit. I can tell. There's things that you want to do.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
But you're realizing you have, whatever it was, between 15, 20% left to raise. And that's going to be your focus, whether that takes 2 more weeks or 2 more months. You're not going to quote unquote report until you're ready for your family and ministry to thrive, not just one or the other. And so I affirm that. So that was one of the things I wanted to say is I affirm that. Secondly is, when I have transitioned in the past, I only really went through that once. I had been a part of a church plant, and so a lot of people have heard that story where I failed terribly as a support raiser. But there was definitely that same thing where as I was trying to get people to stay with me and invest in me, I had to find words for that. And I had to find words for people that were investing in me because I was doing a church plant, and now I was going in this different direction to equip ministry leaders to survive and thrive. And I had to find the words of, hey, would you consider the possibility that your investments in the kingdom work I'm doing over the past few years have been good investments? And would you be willing to continue to invest in me, even though, and the ministry I'm doing, even though the expressions are going to be different? Would you, as I'm moving from a church plant situation to a equipping ministry leaders as my full-time focus, I'm still doing great commission work. Would you continue to invest in me so long as I'm being faithful to that? Like, I had to find those words. That wasn't easy for me. I'm sure I stumbled and bumbled that a few different ways where it got to the point where that just rolled off my tongue easily. That was an inspirational challenge, invitation, but also it was gracious that people are like, nah, we're really about the church plant. You kind of have to carry both.
Yeah. And you do have to let go of people when their passion is in the same spot. And I think too, those relationships are existing. They take more time is what I've noticed in this season. I can't just do the presentation. I actually have a relationship, and they want to know questions like, Mark, tell us, why did you leave Cadence? And so it's an opportunity to say, hey, look, here's where we went in our journey with Cadence, and here's the factors that led to us separating.
And oh, by the way, we don't hate Cadence or anything like that. It was this healthy thing.
Yeah, and here's why we chose this new organization, because they did have the things we were looking for.
Right.
And those are, I've discovered, they're longer conversations than I had initially, and that's why this season is different, and it's what's been highlighting. Those aren't often 20 to 30 minute conversations. They're more like 45 to an hour and they're also willing to give me more time because they have invested.
Right.
So I've noticed it's a different season, and that's why, again, we keep talking about it, but it's changed things for me because they want to know more. They want to know more why I did what I did.
Well, and you care for these people. You
Absolutely.
Watch years, so you know things like, hey, how's your kid doing? Hey, how's that job situation? Like, you're genuinely interested in them, and that doesn't just fit in a 20-minute presentation either.
No, it doesn't. And so it just has taken a lot more time in this season than I had thought it might. And that would be, it's different.
Yeah, yeah. Well, to our listeners, I would just encourage you, if you know someone who's going through one of these seasonal ministry changes right now, whether it's they're just getting started or they're needing to ask for an increase, or maybe they're having kind of a reboot of a refocus of how they spend their time or where they live or all that other stuff, please share this podcast with people. We really want people to be blessed by this podcast. And again, please don't just like click on it now and then. We actually do encourage you to subscribe. I don't understand the metrics. I just know it's a good thing if people subscribe. So please subscribe. And if you haven't, pause right now and please do that if you will. We'll wait. But the point is we want this to be a blessing to people who are seeking to be spiritually healthy, vision-driven, and fully funded for the Great Commission. And so we know that these are at least 3 broad seasons that most support raisers find themselves in. And so we hope that Mark and I's conversation today was a blessing to you and perhaps a blessing to others. Mark, before we go, I do want to swing it back to you one more time and ask you to kind of give us our last word before we close today.
Yeah, I think it's good to take count. And Ecclesiastes says there is a time for everything, right? For everything, there's a season. I think it's good for you to look and say, where am I? And then to assess the landscape and then make a plan going forward. Because I didn't assess my landscape quite as well as what I maybe should have realized. It would have been harder. I think that would have helped. But it also made me aware of how valuable support raising training and how valuable SRS is to me in this meantime. And I think for you, you're not alone in this. Find help, find a coach, get resource, those kind of things. Ask people to help you see through. You've got a team if you're raising support already. Find people on the team that trust to help you through that season. We just invited people. We wrote about running a race in my last update. And I wrote a story about a friend who we were all supposed to run the Berlin Marathon with him, and I'll make this quick. And we all had to bail for different family issues.
Okay.
He ended up running by himself in the marathon. He gets to what he thinks is the end. There's a big balloon arch, and so he makes his last push, only to find out that was the 2 kilometers left to go.
Oh, no.
And so he was just exhausted. And I was just thinking, what would it have been like if we'd been there to run with him those last 2 kilometers? So we've invited our team, hey guys, we're in a new season of support raising. We need your help. We need referrals. And I think for you guys, invite your team to be a part of your season.
Yeah.
That's what I was leaving you with there.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, be honest about that. And a lot of times, you're going to say some stuff in newsletters, but hey, some of that's just going to be good old-fashioned conversations. Use the phone, use the coffee shop, connect. So, well, Mark, my friend, I'm so excited to have you on our team. You're already in the door, even though we're not throwing the door open all the way, and you're not either. That's everybody agrees to that. But I appreciate you just taking the time to even be honest about your process and blessing people with trying to explain that this isn't easy. This is a sanctifying, hard work kind of thing, and yet there's purpose to it. And so I'm thankful for you and Kathy and even what you guys are modeling and being in this kind of reboot season right now. So thank you for being on the podcast today.
Man, what a pleasure. I appreciate the gift, Aaron. Thanks.
Thanks for joining us for this episode. We would love to hear your ideas for future content. Please visit supportraisersolutions.org/feedback to share your thoughts and questions. Also, wherever you download your podcast from, be sure to subscribe for future episodes and come back each week to gain more insight into the process of building and maintaining your personal support team.